Hello and welcome to this special series of Ingram Micro's B2B Tech Talk podcast, Coffee with Women in Tech, with your host, Harpreet. This is a show where incredible women in technology share their stories and successes. Why should a woman consider a career in tech? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this series, where you'll learn why tech is just the place to be for women.
Hello and welcome to this brand new episode of Coffee with Women in Tech podcast. Joining me today are our guests, Alison King, HR Director at Ingram Micro. Hello, Alison. How are you?
Hi, good, fine, thank you.
Delighted to have you with us today. And our second guest is Michelle Cowan, Head of Solutions at Oryxalign. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Harpreet. How are you?
I am really well, thank you. Lovely to have you here. Before we dive in, I just thought it'll be good to know a little bit more about your career journey. So, Michelle, did you always want to work in the tech industry?
No, I didn't, Harpreet. I mean, I'd say I've had quite a winding road to working in tech. Initially, I started off my career fresh out of university as a buyer for a copier and printer distributor, where there was some exposure to technology. I mean, who hasn't had a little run-in with a printer at times and thought it's a bit of a dark art to this thing and making it work? And then I moved to another buying role for BT, which was pretty much Cisco-based. So that was my first real introduction, I'd say, to tech, although I'd understood very little about the products that I was buying. And finally, I moved to work at Oryxalign as a buyer. But this time I was thrown head deep into the world of tech because as a managed services provider, we're immersed in technology and supporting our customers' varying environments with a host of products that we support. So that was quite a steep learning curve for me. But thankfully, the ethos at Oryxalign is to work as a team, and there are many skilled people and helpful people at Oryxalign that I was able to ask questions of.
Oh, sounds great. But what's your experience been like working in tech? How did you find being part of this industry?
It is fast-paced. There's no denying that. You do kind of have to keep up pace, and every which way you look, there's a new product popping up here and there. But it's been exciting. I'm very glad I'm in this industry. It is moving all the time, and it's just, things that you wouldn't expect come up in technology that are in our day-to-day. So it's very exciting.
I can totally relate to that, but thanks for sharing that. Alison, what about you? How's your career journey been?
Again, I think mine wasn't a conscious decision to go into tech. I started out in HR many years ago now, probably too many to remember. But it started out in the direct marketing industry, and at that time it was very manual, very labour-intensive environment. So, if you think very similar to sort of our Crick warehouse, very much that's where I cut my HR teeth. But as time progressed, we started to use tech, and I'm now sort of going back to like the mid-late 80s. So very much before you had even a PC on your desk. It was still a typewriter at the time. Really showing my age there, but I think, as technology, I left there in 2000, and the transformation between 1987 and 2000 was just huge. It was unrecognisable. And I think that's when I really started to see the benefits. And we as an industry, and I think as the world, the World Wide Web came online, and, that's where I started to see how things you could move at a lot faster pace with the use of tech. And from there, I went to Santander, and I was in the technology division. And I think ever since then, I've sort of been pigeonholed a little bit to the point where, I only ever seemed to get approached by tech companies. And as we got into the cloud and all of that piece in sort of like the last sort of 5-10 years, that's where it's really started, I think, to really grow to, being approached by Ingram to sort of come into, again, another tech organisation. And it's just fun. It's fast-paced. Tech really has moved everything on at such a phenomenal speed that I think that's what excites me about it, that, you can grow very rapidly within that tech arena.
Yes, very true. And to be honest, you must have seen that change, Alison, in your career. From the time you started to now.
Yeah,
The change has been phenomenal, and it's
yeah,
fascinating. You've been part of that change and that journey as part of your career journey, but also looking at
yeah,
that in technology.
yeah. And I think, if I look back, am I the great person to use tech? No, guaranteed. Wherever tech is, it will fail when I'm in the room. Um, but you have had to embrace it, and I think, if you look at all the different generations now, it's really very much, I'm classed as the probably slightly after the baby boomers of the world that, really did everything by talking, letter, faxing, even if the youngsters of this world now even knows what one of those is. But yeah, it's just been phenomenal. It really has. We wouldn't be the same world without it, I think. And yeah, there's loads I could talk about it.
How would you say, women joining tech and considering technology as a potential career path? Have you noticed any difference in that as well?
I think particularly, I think in more recent years, I think the young, if you look at how the younger generation, if we're talking about the different age ranges as to how we relate to, it's like, I could quite happily just go back to not having a PC, but you can't nowadays. The youngsters have never known any different. I remember my daughter, we bought in an old into the house. We bought into a real sort of, like, they call it a retro telephone now. And it was the one where you used to dial the numbers properly. And my daughter just didn't even know what that was. And that's because they've grown up with having, iPhones, phones in their hand, texting, messaging. They don't really do a lot of live calling. So I think, it is just exciting where it's going to go next, I think, for me.
Yes, and that is so true. Exactly. Because we are in 2022, and to be honest, it makes me wonder why diversity is still an issue in technology industry, given what we are talking about and everything else that's been happening in the world. Why do you think it's still a challenge?
I mean, I think it is still a bit of a lack of understanding, and that there is still a general stigma. People see tech and they think you have to be into gaming, or you have to have a super maths brain, or you're going to be a coder. I don't believe it's necessarily a lack of opportunities in the industry. If I look at my peers, and there is a better female to male ratio. But I just genuinely think people are still stuck in, what they think is a blue or a pink job mentality. And I think young people are not aware of the different avenues that you can go to in tech. I mean, it really, it's not all just hard tech roles that are coding or engineering. And lastly, I think there's generally an overwhelming amount of career choice and career paths that people can go into. I mean, I myself struggled with my career path when I was going to university, and deciding which degree I wanted to study. It was a process of elimination for me. So there was choice then, but I think there's an overwhelming amount of choice today, which I think plays a part in why diversity in tech is still at play.
Yeah, and I wonder as well, I think, having a 20-year-old daughter that, remember her choosing her options at school, they still tend to go down the traditional lines of, well, what do you want to be? And when you actually ask the youngsters, teenagers of today, what options they're going to pick, they still don't have a clue. And I think it's about us, maybe as businesses, becoming more involved in the schools and, in their options times of when the kids have to really select what they want to do, and actually promoting the roles that are there, because I don't think they're overly promoted in schools at that age. And, when you are selecting options, when do you even think what do you want to do longer term for your career? Nobody does, when I look at where I started. And I think for me, it's about getting into the schools at an early age with the youngsters to really over promote the types of roles that, that we have, what other industries have, and that everybody has that ability and chance to really apply for those. And so for me, it's getting in at the grassroots level, very much so.
Yeah, I agree with both of you because yes, there's so much choice available today. It's bound to be hard for youngsters to choose. And like you said, Alison, we got to start young and catch them young.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if you are both aware that Barbie ran a campaign a few years ago called Imagine the Possibilities, where girls are free to imagine that there can be anything. So I think it's really getting in also at that young age as well and changing the gender stereotypes. You know, it sounds like a silly thing, but that boys will play with cars and girls will play with dolls. But, you know, getting them to understand that women or girls, that they can become anything that they want to be later on in life. So I think I found that really interesting that Barbie did that.
Are there any real life examples of how businesses in tech are actually going about attracting more female talent? So is there something that perhaps Oryxalign is doing that you'd like to share, Michelle?
I think ultimately it comes down to also the organization and the value proposition of the organization and their people and culture strategy. I think it has to be led from the top down. You have to have an organization that is open-minded and willing to give anybody an opportunity. So Carl, our CEO, he's always been committed to supporting women in technology, to bring that gender balance within our organization. And we look at always trying to recruit internally first, and promoting women within Oryxalign has always been a focus for us. Generally, I think, just what the company can offer, the value proposition, really is key for companies today.
And you're absolutely right. Retaining that existing talent is quite key for the organizations, isn't it?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's particularly at Ingram, Michelle, I can't talk about your company, but in terms of Ingram, we're very focused on looking at how we can grow talent within Ingram as we are today. And I think previously we've perhaps not focused on that. It is, however, now a big sort of focus, but more around what are those career progressions and how do you move, and trying to embed that sort of coaching and mentoring sort of approach within the business so that people can take ownership, that if we can develop a sort of a learning organisation where we can encourage our associates to really take control of their own learning paths, whether that be through online courses or whatever, it could be coaching, mentoring, anything like that. That's quite a big thing that we're starting to look at now, to sort of see how you move when you come in perhaps within the advanced solutions arena, and you can then, if you come in as that admin level within the general sales team, the order management piece, where you can progress to afterwards, because those people have got all that grassroots knowledge within our business that actually if we then lost them to somewhere else, we're losing that training and what we've actually given those individuals. So it's how we can grow our own people as well through apprenticeships or graduate schemes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that, Alison. I mean, I think we all could be doing a bit more of that. And I think also just, widening people's viewpoints to understand that just because you work in tech doesn't necessarily mean you have to be technical. There are a lot of roles that aren't purely tech, they're not technical, but they are in tech, so lots of supporting roles, procurement, marketing, finance, customer service. There are many areas in which you can then develop an interest. And if you do want to get more embedded in heavy tech, then you can. But there are so many functions that do support tech, and there's many avenues people can get involved in, really.
Yeah, absolutely. All three of us here are part of technology, and we are not in tech roles, and that's such a fine example of changing that mindset about the gender stereotypes which are associated with technology, and talking about the existing talent, I think work-life balance is also quite key, and not many people outside this industry realize actually that how much of that tech can offer in terms of work-life balance.
Yeah, and I think, if you think the change we've gone through in the last 2 years, I mean, that's a huge paradigm shift for everybody, that, that 9 to 5 of getting up, going to the office and coming home. It's not been there. And I think for tech people and tech savvy people, I think they've always perhaps already been there in that mindset. You don't know. I know back sort of like 5-6 years ago in the bank, it was, we were recruiting people from across the globe. And it didn't matter. They don't have to utilising tech. They don't need to be sat in the same office as somebody. As long as they can have access to the tools that they need, they can work anywhere. And I think that's the slow sort of paradigm shift we're seeing now with sort of hybrid working. And that, I think, is quite important to a lot of, particularly the youngsters and the younger generations today coming through, where they're quite adaptable, they're quite flexible, they're quite happily sit on their phone in a cafe, or a laptop in a cafe, where I think it's not been the norm for a lot of people though over the last few years. But I think it's becoming more so. So I think about retaining, it's about being able to flex your workforce, understanding people's preferences, but that you can still then maintain that sort of the proper culture that the business is looking for. And I think that's going to be a challenge for a lot of businesses this year.
Yes. Alison, you mentioned apprenticeships and graduate schemes. Would you like to talk a bit more about what we're doing at Ingram?
Yeah, we're very much sort of looking at which is the right path for us. And I think apprenticeships is going to be critical. And it's not, when I say apprenticeships, I think there's two parts to apprenticeships. There's the apprenticeships where you're bringing fresh blood into the organisation as an apprentice. But then you've got to remember, organisations have the ability through the government levy on apprenticeships to provide training. And we've got a huge amount of people that are going through apprenticeship training. We can be doing more, absolutely, most definitely still in promoting those. And I think that's really critical for us. So it's not just about bringing on the fresh young people. There's other options that we've been talking around in our L&D arena, bringing people on the ex-forces, that have suddenly find themselves not working, and how can we bring them through apprenticeship routes? But again, not bringing them in at perhaps grass level routes. Everyone's got a huge amount of knowledge and skills to give, but it's then the training that we can support through our apprenticeship levy. And I think people forget that there is those two silos almost, which are equally as important as the other. And then for me, the graduate schemes are going to be around, bringing the grads in, whether that becoming somebody's done. I mean, let's face it, not many people that you talk to that have gone to university end up in a career that they've actually done their degree in. So it's looking at the grads and where people want to go, but knowing then you can bring them in. So for me, it would be perhaps bringing someone into HR that you would be able to grow and develop, and the same in finance. So you've got your different streams. You could have your tech grads and you could have your non-tech grads, but they're still within that technical environment that we're talking about. So for me, it's about exploring those avenues and how we can better promote them and use headcount to support those. Yeah, most definitely.
And that's very interesting to know as well, those different kind of silos like you talked about. So, Michelle, is there anything you think as an industry we are not doing but should be doing for encouraging a diverse and inclusive workplace?
Yes, I mean, I think there could be more structured coaching and mentoring programs around, women in tech specifically. I know the big giants like Cisco, Microsoft, Dell, they've done a lot of work and there's a lot of re-education, but, across the rest of the industry, we really need to be picking up those kind of programs and putting them into place, and start learning from other women as well. We all started off somewhere and have gone through a journey, and you learn from people. So I think that is a really key thing that we should be getting after. There are awards in our industry, things to recognize women, but really at the end of the day, it's getting into the work and doing it. And I think that would be a really good area that we could improve on.
That's a very valid point, because you're right. Some of the big organizations, they have a lot of structured schemes in place to attract the new talent. But I guess how we cascade that into some of the SMBs within the industry to encourage more of that. I think it's quite key.
I think, just again, realizing that people are people, and we here in this industry, you learn from people, just to reach out, ask questions, be curious. That's the way I've learned through asking questions. I don't know the answer to everything. I'm certainly not technical, and I'm sure sometimes my tech colleagues probably roll their eyes, but you learn, and I think just supporting each other really it's been great to work at Oryxalign, where there's a very big team culture. We all work together. There's a lot of people who are there to provide support, ask questions. So I think it's just really having an open culture like that really helps. You can develop yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with what Michelle said. And I also think, sort of like putting my HR hat firmly back on, it's around how we can, make our policies and benefits more attractive for females. If you think we've just recently changed our maternity leave policy, for example, where we used to pay a retention bonus. And now actually what we've done is we've decided to flip that to the point where, before that, we would only pay the statutory. Now we've flipped that to be able to sort of enhance that payment through the giving the females the money when they need it, rather than penalising them for it. It just seems sometimes with some of the statutory payments that were around, it didn't really help people want to go off and have families. But I think by flipping it slightly, it's going to make perhaps individuals that perhaps always put that on a back burner until they were more settled in a role. Maybe it's something that they can now take up and have a lot earlier. So we've enhanced that policy and process and the payment side of it to better improve that. So I think there's more we can probably start to look at around that side of it.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So, Michelle, Alison, if anybody wanted to, any woman listening to this podcast and they are keen to find out more about opportunities available, where do you think they could find more information? What would be literally their first kind of point of contact?
For moving into tech roles specifically?
Yes, yeah.
I think obviously anybody if people know the route they want to go, then that's obviously quite an easy solution for them. If they didn't, then I think it would be looking at companies that are within that tech space, looking at the schemes that are on offered. Are there any grad schemes? Are there any apprenticeships? Or getting in at a grassroots level. That's how I got into HR. If you'd have said to me back in the early 80s, what was I going to do? I wouldn't have said HR. Yet that's where I found my career path and my niche of what I like to do. So I think, youngsters really don't know where they want to go. And it's just, I think maybe schools could do a lot more as well in that promotion of the tech piece and the tech space, like I said earlier. But I think it's finding out who are the not necessarily even the top tech companies. Everyone's got to start somewhere at a young age. And, for me, it would be that route, careers, guidelines for older perhaps populations of women that want to move into that tech space. Then it's find somewhere, get in at a middle level, get to know the industry and work your way up from there. I think is the best thing I can advise people. It's the way I've always approached it anyway, and so far so good.
I think that's really sound advice, and I think for the younger people using tech, just use Google, and there's lots of platforms available, things like Glassdoor, and just doing some research. I mean, back in the day, obviously there wasn't this resource that we have now for people to be able to find out information, and obviously Google is the place to go. So. I would just echo what Alison has said, just do your research and also just broaden your mind. There are lots of ways you can get into tech. It's not necessarily being that coder, but you could, you could start off an avenue in customer service or whatever it might be. So.
Yeah, and exactly, they could search for the company's websites, LinkedIn, joining some groups on LinkedIn, and just, like you said, a good piece of research. And I think that's another opportunity for the businesses and organizations in this industry as well. Like you said, Alison, maybe work with the schools. Before we end, I'd be fascinated to know who your female role model is and why. So, Alison?
Okay, that was a hard one for me. But I think somebody that I've always admired, she's a female actress. She's very strong as an individual. She's passionate about what she does. She still has never lost any femininity, though. And she's played some very strong characters in her career. So for me, the female role model for me would be Helen Mirren.
Ah, love Helen Mirren. I like that. Such a strong personality. And what about you, Michelle? Who's your female role model?
Probably a little lesser known, but I follow a Canadian woman called Jam Gamble, who is a speaker and public speaking coach, and she believes that everyone's voice is their superpower. So she helps people build their confidence and amplify their voice, regardless of your background or position in life. She keeps things relatable and honest, which I think is refreshing, as people can often get bogged down in their traditional ways of thinking and communicating. And ultimately, everyone has a voice and the power to use it, which I think is a fantastic message to push. And Jam, she makes me think about how I am using my voice and how I can use it for the better. So, she's my female role model.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much, Michelle and Alison, for joining me today. It was amazing to have you here, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, stories, and advice. And a big thank you to all our listeners. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this special series, Coffee with Women in Tech, from B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. This was hosted by Harpreet Narang. Tune in again to listen to another great story. To not miss an episode, subscribe today in your favorite podcast platform.